Sound of a cold wind howling, mixed with a distant guttural growl. A silhouette shuffles in the darkness of a cave, ragged breath filling the heavy air. The faint gleam of lightning reveals a face contorted by fear, wide eyes fixed on something beyond the dying fire. Suddenly, a dull thud, a cry muffled by surprise and terror. The silence that follows is more deafening than any roar. The stone, stained a deep red, lies motionless on the ground. Who would do such a thing? And why? The darkness hides ancient secrets, and the first echo of betrayal still resonates in the cold stones of this forgotten era. The air was a biting razor that cut exposed skin, penetrating to the deepest bones. 6.4 million years ago, the world was a brutal stage, painted with the dark hues of raw survival. The vast, merciless savanna stretched beneath a starless sky, swallowed by a night that seemed to have forgotten the sun. His eyes, accustomed to the gloom and sharpened by years of survival, caught the undeniable signs of extreme fatigue and the growing tension on every face. A silent anguish seemed to hang over them all, a premonition that something was terribly wrong. "The hunt was scarce today, Lyra," Erg murmured to Lyra, the healer. Lyra was a woman of ancestral wisdom and a piercing gaze that seemed to see beyond flesh and bone, discerning the very soul of the clan. Her wrinkled face bore the mark of countless nights of vigil and healing, and her movements were as silent and graceful as a shadow. Hunger presses, and the hunting spirits seem to have turned away from us, or perhaps they are punishing us. Lyra nodded slowly, her agile, experienced fingers manipulating a handful of dried herbs and roots that exuded an earthy, medicinal scent, trying to find some relief for empty stomachs. "The spirits are not with us, Erg. There is a shadow growing among us, a darkness that does not come from outside, but from within. I can feel it in every fiber of the air we breathe, in the way clan members look at each other, in the way trust erodes." She looked directly at Erg, her deep eyes conveying a dark, almost despairing premonition. There was no moon, just a blanket of darkness so dense it suffocated any remnant of light or hope. The smell of damp earth, freshly moistened by the fine drizzle that had fallen hours before, mingled with the wild breath of distant predators, the acrid scent of large felines and the sweetish odor of carrion they might have left in their wake, hanging in the air, overpowering the faint, almost pleading aroma of bonfires that bravely fought to break the absolute darkness. The sounds of the night were an orchestra of danger. The rustle of dry, brittle leaves in the biting wind, the distant melancholic croaking of frogs in some hidden waterhole, and most unsettling of all, the intermittent silence. A silence laden with ominous portents that announced the terrifying proximity of something hungry and deadly. Inside the cave, the fire's warmth was a fragile, insufficient mirage against the cold that seemed to penetrate every pore of the skin and every fiber of being. The Shadow Clan, a group of resilient hominids hardened by the elements, huddled in tight groups, seeking what little heat the fire could offer. Their bodies, weary and exhausted from the ceaseless and dangerous search for food during the day, and the constant vigil against the beasts of the night, trembled slightly. The sounds within the cave were muffled, but the tension was palpable. The gnashing of teeth from hunger, the faint snores of some who slept fitfully, and the occasional creak of rock as someone shifted or turned in their restless sleep. Erg, the clan's leader, a burly male with broad shoulders and deep scars from ancient battles etched into his sun and wind-beaten skin, watched his peers. Panic was a silent beast that stalked the heart of every clan member, gnawing at hope. Food was the currency of life, the only thing separating existence from annihilation, and its scarcity threatened to break the fragile bonds of trust and cooperation that held them together against the brutal world. Tensions mounted with every hour of empty stomachs, and minor disagreements, once trivial, became embers ready to ignite a conflagration of discord and resentment. At the edges of the group, set apart Kale, a young hunter known for his unquestionable brute strength and dangerous impulsiveness, watched Erg with an envious, almost sickly glint in his eyes. Kale was ambitious, impatient, and felt his time had come to lead. He believed, with a blind and perilous conviction, that Erg's hunting was flawed, that his leadership was weak, and that Erg was slowly leading them to ruin and death. "He's leading us to ruin, Finn." Kale snarled at his younger brother, Finn, who merely shrugged, uneasy, and visibly uncomfortable with the vehemence of his brother's rage. Finn was more sensitive, and the weight of hunger and tension seemed to crush him, making him feel guilty for Cal's ambition. During the night, while most of the clan members slept a restless sleep tormented by nightmares of hunger, Erg remained vigilant. He walked around the cave, like a wolf guarding its pack, his gaze fixed on the entrance and the movements outside, and every shadow that danced on the cave walls. The wind, which now carried the scent of imminent rain, and the promise of a storm made the night even more oppressive and threatening, as if the sky itself was against them. Suddenly, a noise. It wasn't the howling wind, nor the distant growl of an animal. It was a muffled sound, a soft scraping, followed by cautious footsteps on the loose, damp earth outside the cave entrance. Erg stiffened, his body tense like a drawn bowstring ready to fire. His hand instinctively sought the sharpened wooden spear by his side, his only comfort in the darkness. He approached the cave entrance, his heart pounding uncontrollably in his chest, the sound of his own pulse reverberating in his ears. The darkness outside seemed to pulse, hiding something or someone with an intent that was not that of a hungry animal. What lurked in the shadows of the eternal night, so close to their only protection? Was it a predator or something more dangerous, something that moved with human intelligence and malice? An overwhelming sense of dread enveloped Erg. The storm erupted with a wild, primal fury, tearing sky and earth with an indomitable violence that seemed to emanate from the ancient gods themselves. Lightning rent the darkness in blinding, deafening flashes, painting the landscape with an electric, ghostly purple, revealing the distorted and terrifying silhouette of gnarled trees and giant rocks. Children cried and clung to their parents, their small bodies trembling with fear and cold. He approached some of the younger hunters, his eyes gleaming with dangerous cunning and disguised malice. He was a master at manipulating the weaker and more impressionable, those who yearned for power and food. "Erg is weak," Kale hissed, his voice almost inaudible amidst the storm's clamor and the children's cries. "He cannot feed us. He will keep us trapped here while we starve to death, while life drains from our bodies and our stomachs shrivel. We need a leader who can guide us to abundance, to survival." He gestured towards the cave entrance, where rain fell relentlessly, a true deluge that made the outside impassable. "He will keep us trapped here while we starve. I would go out. I would hunt. I would bring food for all of us, no matter the danger, no matter the fury of the heavens." Adults huddled against the rocky walls, seeking solace and what little warmth they could find in each other's proximity, their eyes fixed on the cave entrance, where nature's fury manifested. The fear of the storm, an uncontrollable force of nature, was a constant and humbling reminder of their insignificance before the overwhelming power of the world. Erg tried to calm the clan, his voice deep and reassuring like that of an ancient ancestor who conveyed wisdom and security. But the worry etched on his face, illuminated only by the intermittent flashes of lightning, was evident and troubling. The day's hunt had been a total failure, a complete disaster. Prey, in their instinct for survival, had hidden from the storm and the hunters, and food supplies were dangerously low, nearing their end. Hunger, once a bearable discomfort, was now a palpable threat that gnawed at the clan's hope and morale, reducing them to mere husks of their former strength, bathed in a supernatural light that seemed to herald the end of days. Thunder, a primeval roar that seemed to rise from the depths of the earth, echoed through the mountains and valleys, making the cave itself tremble and resonate like a hollow shell. Rain fell in uninterrupted torrents, a true deluge that transformed the ground into a slippery, treacherous mire and washed away the scent of predators, replacing it with the intense aroma of wet earth moss and the metallic, refreshing smell of ozone which hung heavy and oppressive in the air. Inside the cave, chaos was contained but palpable and oppressive. Kale, observing the turmoil and growing despair, saw his golden opportunity. One of the hunters, Bale, a young, impressionable, and strong but easily manipulated man, looked at Kale with almost blind admiration, seduced by his words of strength. But the storm, Kale ... it's dangerous. No one can hunt in these conditions. It's madness. Kale laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that mingled with the roar of thunder. The danger is hunger, Bale. It's hunger that kills slowly, gnaws at our strength, devours our hope. The one who has the courage to face nature's fury, that is the true leader. Erg hides like a frightened child. I would fight the heavens if necessary to feed our clan. I am the strongest. He cast a calculated, contemptuous glance at Erg, who was kneeling, comforting the crying child, oblivious to the web of intrigue silently forming behind him, a web that would entrap him. As Kale sowed discord and planted the seeds of rebellion, Lyra, the healer, watched him in silence, her ancestral intuition sounding alarms within her like a war drum. She had noticed the change in Kale's eyes in recent days, a darkness she hadn't seen in any human for a long time, a darkness that heralded imminent danger and a deadly threat. A subtle scratch like claws scraping on rock, followed by a muffled thud, as if something heavy had fallen or been knocked over in the dark. Erg and Lyra exchanged glances, their hearts pounding in unison, a dark premonition invading them. The sound seemed to come from the darkest, most remote part of the cave, where the rocks formed a small alcove, almost a narrow, claustrophobic tunnel that delved into the earth's bowels, a place rarely visited. Erg, spear in hand, walked slowly towards the sound, each step echoing in the darkness and increasing the tension. Tension filled the space, so dense it seemed to materialize in dancing shadows. What was Kale hiding or planning in that secret, dark place? A secret that could change the clan's destiny forever, and not for the better. After Erg had calmed most of the clan, and the storm's noise had somewhat subsided, Lyra approached Erg, her voice an urgent, grave whisper, almost inaudible. Erg, Kale is speaking with the young ones. There is poison in his words. He is weaving a web of lies and resentment, wanting to break the clan's unity. Erg frowned, his eyes fixed on Kale, who now smiled at Bale, a cold, calculating smile, full of presumption and malice. He wants my place, Erg said, a bitter, heavy truth that settled in his chest, colder than the cave air. But he doesn't understand the weight of leadership. He doesn't understand that leadership isn't just brute strength, but wisdom, compassion, and sacrifice. Suddenly, a sound. It wasn't the distant thunder or the howling wind, but something inside the cave, much closer and more unsettling. The darkness of the alcove was almost absolute, an impenetrable gloom that swallowed any light. Even the faint glow of the bonfire coming from the main area of the cave, distant and dying. The air there was dense, heavy with the smell of damp earth and something else ... Something damp and metallic, an odor that hinted at blood and mystery, a scent of danger. He had moved away from the group and was sitting alone, his back against a cold rock, sharpening a small stone knife with precise, methodical movements like a butcher preparing his tool. His mind was boiling with plans, burning with the ambition to seize control of the clan. He knew that Erg was the only real obstacle to his rise to power. The clan was weak, hungry, and desperate, ripe for manipulation. They needed a strong leader, and Kale believed he was that leader, the only one capable of guiding them to survival, even if it meant eliminating anyone in his way without scruples. Erg moved cautiously, his spear probing the space in front of him, feeling the roughness of the rocky walls and the unevenness of the floor covered with small, loose stones. The sound he had heard earlier seemed to have ceased abruptly, replaced only by Erg's heavy, tense breathing, which reverberated in the confined space, and the incessant, monotonous dripping of water that ran down the damp, slippery cave walls, creating small puddles on the ground. Lyra followed him closely, her figure moving like a shadow, almost silently, her face illuminated only by the faint flickering light of the bonfire coming from the main area of the cave, casting dancing, ghostly shadows on the rocky, uneven walls, distorting them into menacing shapes. As Erg advanced, his feet tripped over something, an object hidden in the gloom. He knelt, his hand finding a cold, irregular surface. It was a stone, not an ordinary stone, like those found anywhere. It was a stone with a sharp edge, roughly but effectively crafted, an instrument for cutting or striking, a tool, or perhaps a weapon. And next to it, Erg noticed a fresh trail of mud, different from the dry, dusty cave floor. Lyra approached and, with her thin, sensitive fingers, touched the mud, then smelled it. Her eyes narrowed in a mix of surprise and concern. "This mud isn't from here, Erg," she whispered, her voice grave. "It's from outside. Someone was out there, after the storm or during it, and brought this in. Recently." Erg looked at Lyra, his eyes questioning, and a shiver ran down his spine. They had found similar stone tools before, but this one seemed to have been used recently, and the mud ... It was a disturbing sign, an indication that something was being secretly planned. While Erg and Lyra investigated the mysterious find, Kale, in the main part of the cave, watched them with an expression of calculated indifference, almost boredom, but with a malicious glint in his eyes. Hunger was a demon that gnawed at the clan's soul, not just their bodies, but also their hope. Children whimpered softly, their stomachs rumbling, and the elders coughed weakly. "You lead us to death, Erg. The storm is a sign from the spirits that we should stay protected. Staying is safer." He lay near the bonfire, whose flames flickered precariously, almost extinguished, its last sparks slowly dying. The smell of ash and burnt charcoal, mixed with the persistent smell of damp earth, hung in the air. The bonfire, a symbol of safety, warmth, and life for the clan, was dying, its last embers fighting to survive, like the clan's hope. Erg watched the last weak embers, feeling the weight of the decision to hunt, the danger it implied, and the growing threat from Kale. He felt Kal's gaze on him, even in the dark, a cold, calculating, oppressive presence, like a lurking shadow. Suddenly, a noise. A slight scratch near the bonfire, as if something was being dragged or moved. Erg turned, but the darkness was deep and treacherous. Was it just the wind, or the ground giving way under the weight of the rains? Or was something more sinister lurking in the gloom, on the verge of the dying fire, ready to extinguish Erg's hope and life forever? The answer would come with dawn, or perhaps even before it, in an act of unspeakable betrayal. His eyes turned to the clan members, who watched them with apprehension, each with their own internal battle. "I will lead them to the hunt when the sun returns. I will guide them to abundance and safety that Erg cannot give." A murmur of agreement, hesitant but audible, echoed among some of the young ones, those who were already under Kel's influence and blinded by his promises. Erg felt a pang of anger and betrayal, a sharp pain in his chest. He saw the seed of doubt planted by Kale growing, infecting the clan's mind, dividing it. The adults, once proud and full of vitality, were hunched over under the weight of uncertainty and fear of the future, their eyes empty. Erg, despite his own concern and the unsettling discovery of the stone, tried to keep hope alive, telling stories of abundant hunts and sunny days to come, trying to calm everyone. But the words seemed empty against empty stomachs and the growing despair that gripped them all. "We must hunt tomorrow," Erg declared, his voice resonating through the cave, charged with determination. but also a hint of desperation and urgency. Even if the storm persists, we must go. We can't wait any longer. If we don't go, we will starve to death. Kale raised his head, his eyes meeting Erg's with blatant defiance. A cold, cruel smile forming on his lips, a smile that didn't reach his cold, empty eyes. That night, sleep did not come easily for Erg. Dawn arrived, not with a promising golden sunrise, which usually heralded a new day of hunting and hope, but with a dense, sticky mist that embraced the savannah like a heavy, gray shroud. Their wooden spears with fire-hardened tips in hand, ready for combat. Food supplies were almost depleted, and the empty stomachs of their children and the despair of their people echoed in his ears, pushing him forward, even against the danger. Erg felt the weight of every clan member on his shoulders, the overwhelming responsibility of keeping them alive in such a hostile and merciless world. As they advanced, Erg noticed a strange and unsettling detail. The animal tracks that should have been there, fresh and abundant, were strangely absent, and there was a smell in the air. A subtle smell of smoke, different from the familiar smell of the clan's bonfires, more acrid, more recent. As if someone or something had passed through there recently and made a small fire. Perhaps to warm themselves, perhaps to hide their presence, perhaps to set a trap. With each deep breath, the cold air entered their lungs, a constant reminder of the fragility of their existence and nature's implacability. The silence was oppressive and almost deafening, broken only by the muffled sound of their own footsteps on the undergrowth and the incessant dripping of moisture from the leaves that flowed to the ground, creating small, sinister melodies. Lyra had warned Erg about the shadow she felt, a visceral sensation that something terribly wrong was coming. And with each step into the thick mist, Lyra's dark premonition seemed to materialize in every moist thread of air and every ghostly shadow that moved in the depths of the fog. The air was heavy, damp, and cold, and the smell of wet earth mingled with the aroma of damp moss and the unmistakable presence of distant decay, a constant and dark reminder of the death that lurked in every shadow and at every step. Visibility was almost nil, a whitish barrier that turned every step into a blind leap into the unknown, every sound into an omen, every shadow into a threat. Erg, along with some of his most loyal hunters, men and women who trusted him with their lives, who had fought by his side in countless hunts and battles, advanced cautiously through the mist. The hunt was a desperate necessity, an imperative for the clan's survival. Suddenly, a movement. Not an animal slinking through the mist, but a slender, menacing figure that materialized in the whiteness, almost imperceptibly, like a ghost appearing from nowhere. It was Kale. He was alone, and his eyes fixed on Erg carried a disturbing intensity, a glint of malice and despair, like the eyes of a predator cornering its prey. He was not with the hunt, but his posture was that of a predator, tense and ready to attack, not to seek food. Erg felt a shiver run down his spine, a terrible premonition that confirmed his worst fears. Lyra's premonition, the strange stone he had found in the cave's alcove, Cal's strange behavior and growing hostility. It all fit into a sinister and undesirable pattern, a deadly plan. Cal, what are you doing here? Where's the rest of the hunt? Why are you alone? Erg asked, his voice low and tense, charged with a growing distrust he could no longer hide. Kale did not answer immediately. A cold, cruel smile formed on his lips, a smile that did not reach his cold, empty eyes devoid of humanity. He took a step forward, his hand raising a stone. Not an ordinary stone from the ground, but the same sharp, chipped stone Erg had found in the cave's alcove, the same one where he had noticed the strange mud trail. It seemed to pulse with a dark and dangerous energy in his hands, almost alive. This clan needs a strong leader, Kale finally said, his voice a hoarse, venomous whisper echoing in the mist, almost like a dark enchantment. A leader who is not afraid to take risks, who does not hide in the shadows of inaction, who does what needs to be done. Cal's eyes gleamed with dangerous fanaticism, an obsession with power that had consumed him. Erg is weak. I will be that leader. I will guide them to glory, to abundance. Before Erg could react, before he could even process the depth of the betrayal, before his loyal hunters could intervene, Cal lunged with surprising speed, the stone raised in a deadly arc. The movement was swift, brutal, an act of unspeakable cowardice. Erg tried to dodge, but the attack was precise, aimed at his unprotected temple, a vital spot. A cry, more of surprise and heart-wrenching betrayal than physical pain, escaped Erg's lips, a guttural, primal sound, a final lament. The cry was muffled by the thick mist, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the morning, as if nature itself conspired to hide the crime. Erg fell, the spear slipping from his weakened hands, his eyes wide with incomprehension and pain, fixed on Cal's distorted face. The last thing he saw was Cal's expression, devoid of any emotion or regret, before absolute darkness swallowed him forever. Erg's body, once strong and vibrant, lay inert on the damp grass, a dark, lonely knot in the gray, ghostly landscape. Humanity's first murder had occurred, a dark secret hidden by the mist and the betrayal of a brother, which would now hang over the clan's memory like an ancient curse, an indelible stain on history. The muffled sound of Erg's body falling on the damp grass echoed hauntingly in the minds of the loyal hunters who accompanied him, who watched the scene in shock and paralyzed by horror and disbelief. The mist, once a mysterious veil, now seemed like a macabre shroud that hid the terrible truth of a primordial crime, making the atmosphere even more oppressive. His face was impassive, a mask of coldness, but his eyes gleamed with cold, ruthless determination, without any sign of remorse. Erg's body was carried in a heavy, oppressive silence, each step feeling the weight not only of the inert body, but of the cruel and shocking revelation they carried, a truth that would change the clan forever. The news spread like wildfire among the clan members, each whisper laden with shock, disbelief, and newfound fear, a fear that once was of predators, now was of one of their own. The smell of damp earth and an almost palpable fear hung in the cave air, overpowering the familiar smell of bonfire smoke, which now seemed to have a bitter, dark tone. Erg was weak. He would have led us to death by hunger and indecision. I did what had to be done to save this clan. This act was necessary for our survival. His voice, though low, carried a chilling authority, a power that came from his cruelty and lack of scruples. Now, I am the leader, and those who do not follow me will perish. There will be no mercy for those who oppose my will. The threat was clear, direct, and undeniable, and the tension was almost palpable, as dense as the mist that still enveloped them, suffocating them. The smell of blood, metallic and bittersweet, began to spread, insidiously mingling with the damp morning air and the scent of wet earth, a smell that would never be forgotten. Finn, Cal's brother and one of the hunters, was the first to react, to break the numbness of the shock that dominated them. His eyes widened in unspeakable horror at the sight of Erg, motionless, inert, his body stretched out in the mist. "Cal, what have you done?" he cried, his voice choked with disbelief, pain, and the terror that invaded him, a mixture of fury and despair. Cal turned to them, the stone still stained a deep, thick red, still in his hand, an extension of his own wickedness. The return to the cave was a funeral procession amidst the morning gloom. Lara, the healer, felt the tragedy in every fiber of her being. She was the first to approach Erg's body, her eyes fixed on the wound on his temple, a dark, hideous hole that revealed the brutality of the attack. "I acted for the good of the clan, Lyra. Erg was an obstacle. He was dragging us into hunger and weakness. I am the strength we need." Voices, once whispered in murmurs of shock, began to rise, first timidly, then with more force and conviction. The first murder had broken something fundamental and irreparable in the clan, and the scar would be deep, perhaps eternal. The decision of whom they would follow and whether Erg's sacrifice would be in vain hung over the cave like an invisible sharp sword, ready to fall. Night fell again, and with it, the bonfire, now stronger, cast dancing shadows that seemed to mock the tragedy and the dilemma. Lyra's eyes met Finn's, and she saw in him the same pain, uncertainty, and a glimmer of courage she felt, a hope that truth would prevail. She knew that truth, if not spoken and accepted, would condemn them all to an existence under tyranny and injustice. What would Lyra and Finn do with the truth they knew about Cale? And would the clan survive this violent and moral rupture? Or would it crumble into chaos and despair, losing its very human essence? Some, especially the younger and more impressionable, who had been easily seduced by Cale's promise of power and abundance, seemed willing to accept his distorted explanation, blinded by the promise of immediate food and safety. Others, especially the elders, those who remembered Erg's wisdom and compassion, and those loyal to him, looked at Cale with deep distrust and horror, their hearts heavy with grief. Finn, his face pale and his eyes teary, looked from Cale to Erg's body, torn between loyalty to his blood brother and repulsion at the heinous act he had witnessed. The weight of guilt was crushing him, making him feel sick. He gestured to the clan members, who watched in silence, their faces a mixture of fear, confusion, and morbid curiosity, fascinated by the horror of what they had witnessed and the power Cale seemed to exude. I will be a strong leader. I will lead them to prosperity and safety that Erg could never give. Only to me must you obey. A tear rolled down her aged face, but her gaze, when it turned to Cale, was one of cold, unwavering determination, an ancient strength. You did this, she accused, her voice trembling with fury and sorrow, but charged with unquestionable authority. You took an innocent life. You broke the most sacred law of the ancestors, the law of blood, the law of our unity. You stained the clan's soul with your cruelty. Cale stood firm, his posture arrogant and defiant, showing no weakness. The cave became an impromptu courtroom, illuminated by the flickering bonfire, casting distorted shadows on the walls, like ghostly figures of judgment. The dilemma was clear and cruel. Accept a new, tyrannical leader, a murderer who betrayed his own kind, or defy him, risking their own lives and those of their loved ones in the name of justice. The following dawn brought a pale, cold sun, which struggled hard to penetrate the thick layer of gray clouds that covered the sky, as if the world itself was in mourning. The air still carried the persistent dampness of the mist and the metallic, nauseating smell of blood that seemed to permeate the cave itself, like an ancestral curse that would not be easily washed away. The atmosphere was one of deep mourning and suffocating, almost palpable tension, which prevented free breathing. She watched Cale, rage bubbling in her chest, an ancient fury that compelled her to act. I saw it, Lyra, he confessed, his voice a hoarse, fragile whisper, laden with terror and remorse. I saw what he did. He made me swear secrecy, threatened my family's life if I told. But the that guilt gnaws at me like a hungry animal. I can't bear it anymore. The guilt corroded him like acid, and his loyalty to Cale collapsed under the overwhelming weight of the truth and the horror he had witnessed. But now, Lyra, what will we do? He is strong. He will kill us, all of us, if we oppose him. She knew that the truth about what he had done could not remain hidden for much longer. The lie would suffocate them, suffocate everyone. She approached Finn, Cal's brother, who was sitting alone, his gaze lost in the fire's flames, his expression of deep anguish and guilt, a visible torment. The weight of the secret was destroying him from within. Finn, she whispered, her voice soft but firm and charged with urgency, almost like a command. Your brother is not the leader this clan needs. He shed blood. He took an innocent life. He lied to us. He is a murderer, Finn, a traitor. Erg's body had been removed to be buried in a sacred place, and a heavy, oppressive silence hung over the clan, broken only by the occasional whimpers of hungry children and the apprehensive, fearful whispers of the adults who wondered what the future held. Cale had taken control with an iron fist, brutal and without compassion, a tyrant on the rise. His eyes, once burning with unchecked ambition, now bore the weight of authority and a cold glint of cruelty, a warning to all. He commanded, not asked, and his harsh, authoritarian voice echoed through the cave, devoid of the warmth or compassion that Erg had always shown, creating an abyss between him and the clan. Cale's promise to find food seemed empty and baseless, like all his words. The day's hunt, led by him, had been a miserable failure, and the clan's frustration and hunger were evident on every pale, thin face and every look of despair. The young ones who had supported him, seduced by his empty promises, now began to question their choices, the trust they had placed in him beginning to crumble like a rock eroding under the force of the elements. Lyra, the healer, felt the tragedy in every fiber of her being. Finn shivered, his eyes fixed on the ground, as if the earth could swallow him at any moment. Lyra placed her hand on Finn's shoulder, her eyes meeting his, conveying an unwavering strength and ancient courage. Truth is our only weapon, Finn. It's the only thing that can save us. The clan needs to know the truth. They deserve to know who Cale truly is, the monster behind the mask. You have the power to free them. Finn's decision was crucial. He could protect his brother, the murderer, or defend the truth and perhaps save the clan from the tyranny, hunger, and moral ruin that Cale represented. Hunger, once a silent pain, now transformed into a cry for justice, for vengeance, for a return to order. Erg was buried with solemn rituals and honor, his name etched into the clan's memory, and his memory revered as that of a just and courageous leader. Although the pain of loss was immense and the wound deep, the truth had brought a new understanding, a new law for the tribe. An unwritten law, but etched into the heart of every member. Life was sacred, and betrayal, like murder, would be punished with banishment, social death, condemnation to solitude, and the fury of nature. The echo of the lament for Erg's loss still resonated, a ghostly sound mingling with the wind, but with it, a new resilience and a new awareness of human wickedness. The clan had survived betrayal and grief, emerging stronger with a new morality and a deeper understanding of good and evil. But what else did the future hold for these early humans in such a wild and merciless world? What other secrets did the past still hold, buried in the depths of the earth and memory? What new threats and discoveries awaited in the forgotten depths of prehistory, as humanity's journey had just begun, and the first bloodshed would echo forever in its history? Cale, seeing the truth revealed and the clan's fury, tried to flee, desperate, but was restrained by the very hunters he had tried to lead, those who now despised him and held him with brute force. He was expelled from the clan, banished, condemned to wander alone through the relentless savannah, where hunger, thirst, and predators would become his tormentors, where he would find his own dark destiny. He disappeared into the darkness of the night, his fate uncertain, but certainly cruel and solitary. Loyalty to blood versus loyalty to justice, to truth, to the very essence of their humanity. At the most tense moment of the night, when the bonfire was at its lowest point, its flames almost extinguished, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe in anguish, Finn stood up, his eyes fixed on Cale, who stood with his back to him, giving harsh, merciless orders to a group of hunters, oblivious to the drama unfolding. The clan, hungry, disheartened, and desperate, awaited their new leader's words, the promise of a hunt that never came, only more disappointments. Erg was murdered, and I found the bloody stone, the murder weapon. There were no animals nearby, only the smell of ambition and the smell of Cale. He is a murderer. He is a stain on our clan. He brought disgrace upon us." She pointed at Kale, her eyes flashing with righteous fury, an unquenchable fire. "He broke the law of the ancestors. He brought the curse of blood upon our people. He is not worthy to lead. Kale lied to us." Finn shouted, his voice strong and clear, echoing through the cave, breaking the oppressive silence and overwhelming everyone with the raw truth. Erg was not killed by nature. Kale killed him. I saw it. He killed him with a stone in the mist, while Erg was unsuspecting and unarmed. A murmur of shock and disbelief, followed by cries of fury and horror, swept through the clan. Faces, previously downtrodden and hopeless, rose, shocked and horrified by the revelation. Kale turned to Finn, his face contorted with murderous rage, his eyes burning with hatred and vengeance. "You are a traitor, a liar. I curse you. You will die for this." But Lyra stepped forward, her voice strong and clear, resonating with the authority of an ancestral matriarch, a voice that could not be ignored. The clan revolted. Fear turned into anger, and anger into a burning desire for justice. The first murder in human history had left an indelible stain on the clan's soul.